Franklin Richards is one of the most powerful entities in the entire Marvel multiverse. This kid has defeated gods, and actually created entire universes on occasion, sometimes by accident. Franklin truly is a deity in his own right, and while he doesn't always have control over his power, that power cannot be understated. Anyway, did you know he has a little sister? This is Valeria Richards, Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman's second kid, and while she is often overshadowed by her god-baby older brother, she is equally as interesting and in some regards more interesting. Sure, she might not be able to create universes, but when you're the only member of the Fantastic Four on consistently good terms with Doctor Doom, screw reality warping, who needs that? This video is mostly going to focus on the origins of Valeria, and I do want to make it very clear that I meant origins as the plural of that word, because Valeria has like 3 different origin stories, or maybe 2.5 if you want to be really technical about it, I guess. We're actually going to be dealing with some surprisingly heavy topics in today's comic history, and some very stupid ones as well. The story of Valeria is an emotional roller coaster, and a roller coaster in other ways. To find out exactly what I mean by that, we're just gonna have to get started, and you will be able to tell when the tone shift happens. But we get to start in serious territory, so let's begin. For what we'll be talking about today, the publication years are going to be very important, mostly because it will prove how wild of a right turn this storyline takes. And we're going to begin a decade before Valeria actually enters the picture in 1973. This arc is about Franklin Richards, worth covering because it will set the emotional tone for Valeria's birth years later. I already talked about Franklin briefly in the intro, probably. I recorded the intro last, so I'm sure I said whatever I needed to, but ultimately, he's a god baby. We pretty much all know that. Important thing to note about these god baby powers though, especially back in the 1970s, they were treated as less of a cosmic thing and more like a psychic thing. He was still equally powerful, but his abilities revolved around psychic energy contained within his mind, which he could not often control because, you know, he was a baby. This fact tees us up for one of the most controversial moments in Fantastic Four history, one which some of you have definitely heard of before: the time Reed Richards put his own son into a coma. Though despite that dramatic setup, this moment really is not as bad as it seems. It's not great, don't get me wrong, but I see people take this out of context quite a bit and use it as an example of Reed Richards being a horrible person. In context, however, I'm just gonna put this very bluntly, that baby was gonna explode. Right before this scene, Franklin had been hit by a blast of weird energy fired by Annihilus, and those were causing his psychic abilities to overload. Since he was so young, he couldn't rein them in himself, and so if they had been allowed to build, not only would he have killed himself, he would have detonated in a blast that Reed calls big enough to kill every living creature in the solar system. Thus, Reed blasting his own son here was not something that he particularly wanted to do. It was to prevent his son from killing everybody around, and the Coma gun, while definitely weird out of context, was a specifically non-lethal way to handle that. So it was a bad situation, but like, if you actually read the book, yeah, it was written as a bad situation, and this was probably the best outcome. So why do I bring this up in the video about Valeria? Well, like I said, it was written as a bad situation. This moment breaks up the Fantastic Four entirely for a little bit, as Invisible Woman is so distraught by this that she takes Franklin and leaves. Even though what Reed was doing was reasonable for the situation, I mean, it still was not a good look, and she did not want their child to be anywhere near him. Franklin recovers and the team gets back together, of course, but this is still an incredibly traumatic moment that gets referenced in F4 comics for years going forward. And that is why I wanted to bring it up. It highlights just how big of a deal it was that Reed and Sue decided to have another kid. Now we fast forward 10 years to 1983. The Fantastic Four are doing well in this period. Their relationships have had time to heal, and at the moment they are going on a fun little exploratory mission in the negative zone. I want to specifically point out the phrasing I used there as well, because I was not exaggerating. They were going to the negative zone largely for fun, and also to explore and test out new scientific theories, because they are the F4 and that's what they do, but like, they weren't going in there to fight a villain or anything like that. For those unfamiliar with the Negative Zone, it is most notorious for its villains like Annihilus, but there's also a lot of other stuff there. As Reed himself puts it, it's a universe as vast and immeasurable as our own, with planets, suns, life forms, and civilizations to beggar the imagination. How can they turn their backs on a cosmos so full of awe and wonder? To summarize their motivations more simply, the Fantastic Four are a bunch of space nerds, so they venture into the Negative Zone and are kicking around there for several issues, at which point Reed and Sue make an interesting decision. In the middle of their extra-dimensional space adventure, which they have specifically undertaken to find new and strange things, they decide that now is the perfect time to, expand the family, if you catch my drift. Reed shoots his cosmic rays into Sue's Negative Zone, and abracadabra, Invisible Woman is pregnant for the second time, which is not a quick arc either. Invisible Woman was pregnant for 13 issues of the Fantastic Four, which was over a year in real-world publication time. Readers were waiting to see what powers, if any, the second kid of the Fantastic Four had, which is also why I wanted to start this video with the Franklin trauma. Again, this was a really big deal. Though, of course, when it came time for the baby to be born, it was not going to be a simple procedure, not in this family. In the final stages of Sue's pregnancy, her unborn daughter began emitting radiation bursts because she was conceived in the Negative Zone, and that had a weird effect on her development. Again, guys, maybe not the best idea to have a child when you're in another dimension full of science that you don't understand. But whatever, it's just radiation. The Fantastic Four are great at radiation. They can probably handle it. Except, maybe not this time. Mr. Fantastic has no idea what's going on, let alone how to stop it, to such an extent that he has to call in assistance from other scientists. And when Reed Richards has to do that, you know things are getting bad. Reed rallies Walter Lankowski, otherwise known as Sasquatch, and Bruce Banner as radiation experts. He even calls in Morbius, yes, that Michael Morbius, as he is one of the very few superheroes, especially back at the time, that was a qualified medical doctor. Unfortunately, none of them can figure out what's going on either, and as Reed brings more minds onto the project, he eventually gets desperate enough to seek the help of Dr. Octopus, who was imprisoned at the time. He gets Otto out of jail, but then Otto reunites with his arms and goes on an entire rampage, which is what much of the issue is about. This is about Reed just kind of chasing Dr. Octopus around as Invisible Woman is still in the hospital. Eventually, Reed convinces Otto to lend his expertise, and they rush back to Sue's side, where they learn that they were too late, and the baby didn't make it. I need to take a second here to hammer home exactly how this issue was intended to be read. The Fantastic Four are not about to pull some weird time travel comic book nonsense and save the baby or anything like that. This arc is about the tragedy of miscarriage. Look at the panel where Reed finds out that his unborn child is dead. I did not edit this. It is just the single panel in the middle of an otherwise black page. And since I know the scale and time of these kind of things can be lost in the YouTube video format, I just want to say again that this was after a real-world year of Invisible Woman's pregnancy. This comic was about how sometimes bad things can happen to good people, and no matter how capable those people are, sometimes tragedies are unavoidable. This was the first time that superheroes had been seen in an arc like this, and it hit incredibly hard. After this tragedy, life just had to go on for the Fantastic Four, though, because they didn't have another option. They couldn't do anything about this, they just had to go forward. Now, we did get to see the ramifications of this emotionally. That was a huge thing for many years after their second child's death. Actually, this trauma is one of the things that pushed Invisible Woman to become Malice. So yeah, think about that the next time you're looking at the Marvel Rivals skid. Now, here's where we have to take something of a turn. I told you right in the intro that the character of Valeria Richards is like an emotional roller coaster and a roller coaster in other ways. One of those other ways is the level of respect that they have towards this original story. That is about to dip substantially. After Sue's miscarriage, the Fantastic Four grow and change and heal. Once again, I will say there is no comic book time travel nonsense coming to save their unborn child. This is a comic book about tragedy, and that is how it is going to remain. Until 1999, when Chris Claremont decided, what if there was comic book time travel nonsense coming back to save this kid? In issue 15 of Chris Claremont's Fantastic Four series, the Four are checking out a weird time anomaly and get this strange future vision of three people who consist of, brace yourself for this, an older Invisible Woman who has married Dr. Doom, an adult Franklin Richards, and also a woman who no one has ever seen before named Valeria. This is literally a single panel in this issue, and it does not get addressed for a couple more issues. So, I don't know, maybe it was just like a weird dark vision of a horrible future or something like that. No, it was real, and we get to see it followed up on 5 issues later in issue 20. In this one, we see Franklin and his babysitters just hanging out in the Baxter building. It is a normal night for them, until a random woman just kind of walks out of the bathroom as abruptly as I am presenting it to you here. She seems completely at home, she's wearing pajamas, she is literally in the middle of brushing her teeth, and she's very confused why all these people are looking at her weird. Then she sees baby Franklin Richards and goes, "Ah crap, I time traveled, didn't I?" And then before she can explain anything else, a supervillain attacks, and she gets this little magical power-up shot where she puts on this suit that's like half Fantastic Four and half Dr. Doom, and she calls herself Marvel Girl, and then there's a fight, and no one, neither the people in the comic or the readers, have any idea what's going on. Fortunately, this Marvel Girl explains at least a little bit fairly quickly. She introduces herself as Valeria Von Doom, and the combination of the Von Doom last name and the fact that she looks exactly like Invisible Woman when she was a teenager causes some understandable friction. The question of where Valeria comes from and even what she actually is gets a bunch of answers thrown around in rapid succession. She claims to be from the future, specifically that future from several issues ago where Invisible Woman married Doom. Time traveling is also relatively normal for her. She calls this thing time dancing. Apparently, she just does it sometimes, and Franklin does it too, and it's not really explained more than that. Reed runs a couple of genetic tests on her and confirms that she does have the DNA of their family, and more so, she doesn't seem to resemble Doom whatsoever. She is essentially Reed and Sue's kid, but like from the future, even though that kid wasn't around anymore because that kid died years prior. Complicating things more is the fact that Valeria legitimately views Doom as a father figure, to such an extent that when she sees him again, she tries to hug him. But this is not future Doom, this is present day Doom, so he has no idea who the hell this teen girl is wearing part of his armor, and then he's just really confused for the rest of their interaction. Regardless of her affiliation with Doom, though, she is definitely a hero. She has weird, nebulously defined psychic powers of her own, and also her armor is Doom tech, which provides her a lot more protection. So she ends up staying in the past and just kind of joining the F4 temporarily as their weird daughter from the future who is never defined very well. And just to be so clear, she is not defined very well. I don't want to take the heat for her backstory having a lot of weird gaps in it. Valeria's appearance during this era just kind of feels like it skips around a lot. I read all the comics that she's in during this arc, and it really feels like there are parts that are missing. But they aren't, so whatever. Before we move to her next milestone, though, there is one very important note that I have to hit. One of the theories that Reed and Sue toss around as to her existence in this timeline is that she isn't actually real. Remember, Franklin Richards is a god baby, and at this point he's an only child with a very weird home life, and he's kind of lonely. So the idea is briefly floated that maybe Valeria is his equivalent of an imaginary friend. He wants somebody to hang out with, so he has reality warped himself a sister. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind for a minute, because now we're going to pivot entirely. A couple issues into Valeria's reappearance in her Marvel Girl status quo, her and Franklin get sent into an alternate dimension for their own safety, because there was a whole other thing with Dr. Doom going on. That storyline isn't really important for what we're talking about today. However, several issues later, they come back to reality because of a big Galactus thing happening. I hate to do this twice in rapid succession, but that's kind of just how this very weirdly structured comic has to go. The Galactus thing is also not super important to the core of the story, but I do need to summarize it very quickly. There's a cosmic being named Abraxas. He is a multiversal entity that is hopping around to different universes and killing all of the Galactus variants that he can find. He is also messing with the F4 because he's a jerk and likes screwing around with people, and this is coming to a final confrontation that is going to involve Franklin. See, the main timeline Galactus had been killed at this point. In fact, his death was the thing that unleashed Abraxas in the first place. That's a whole nother story. But the Fantastic Four sort of needed Galactus for their plan to take down the other evil entity. And after many pages of Abraxas and one of his henchmen just beating up the Fantastic Four handily, Franklin has an epiphany all of a sudden. He had been getting mentored a little bit by this cosmic lady named Roma, who is really a Captain Britain character that just appeared in Fantastic Four for this one arc. She had been teaching him things, and apparently this was the time where Franklin was like, I understand what all that teaching is for. I can bring us a Galactus, and also I have a big exposition dump that I need to do right away. And then that exposition dump happens. Cue ruining a years-old arc, because after over a decade of the Fantastic Four's second kid being a very human, emotional tragedy, they reveal that Franklin Richards used his god powers at some point to time travel back to the moment of the miscarriage and, use his brain to save the consciousness of his unborn sister and send it into another timeline, and that's what Valeria is. So she's like the exact same kid that Franklin teleported away before she died, and she was just existing without any real explanation in another timeline until everything converged again and she got sent from her future back into the past so that she would be here in this moment and she could combine her nebulous and poorly explained psychic powers with Franklin's powers so that they can resurrect Galactus. Some of you might be confused, very understandably. Some of you also might think that I'm exaggerating here when I describe how stupid that arc sounds. So let me just show you an exact panel here where Franklin describes what he did as went back, saved her, and sent her someplace else. And that is the only explanation that we get. I'm kind of just extrapolating what I can there, because the comic has no interest in actually going into it, which I guess is fine, considering that going into it would probably make it worse. Anyway, from this incredibly weird out-of-nowhere twist, Franklin and Valeria do what they were apparently destined to do and combine their powers and resurrect Galactus, and then Galactus doesn't play as important of a role as you might think he does in the final confrontation. He just kind of teleports a weapon to Reed that then lets him defeat Abraxas. They just use the ultimate nullifier on him again, and that's it. The Abraxas arc is over. And now, in the final pages of this issue, it's about to get even weirder. In the aftermath of the fight, Valeria is just gone. She has vanished and nobody exactly knows where she is. And the final panel of the issue reveals that somehow Franklin has reverted her back into a fetus and impregnated, or dare I say, repregnated Susan Richards with Valeria again. This is insane. That is the only word that I have to describe it, and the comic has no interest at all in exploring the existentially horrifying ramifications of what the hell just happened. They do confirm that this is the same Valeria. It's not like it's a new person. They also never address the fact that her, consciousness maybe got reverted into being a fetus, which is terrifying. Fortunately, future writers just kind of pretend that this wasn't a thing and treat her as a normal baby growing up. Thank God. But wow, what a thing to be canon. Before we move on to better arcs and the thing that actually makes Valeria good and interesting as a character, I do have to point out the structure of this page, which implies some really weird things, because the rest of the F4 is understandably very, very confused, and then Sue is just like, what are you staring at? Haven't you ever seen a woman who's gonna have a baby? Which implies that, to her, this is normal. She's not surprised by her sudden pregnancy, but everybody else is, and I don't know what that means for the mental and memory implications of all. I'm not gonna think about it. Screw it, we're moving on. The comic doesn't explain it, and that means I don't have to either. From here, Invisible Woman is just pregnant again with the same baby another time, and things are going to play out a little bit differently. Now, I will note that one of the reasons this arc is so incredibly scattered is probably that there was a major creative team change about halfway through it, which is usually not a good thing to see. Chris Claremont was the one who brought Valeria back. He did the whole thing where she was from a possible future where Invisible Woman marries Doom and all that, but he was not actually the one that wrote the explanation as to why, with Franklin Richards doing all that kind of magic stuff. Those comics are credited to a team of 3 writers, those being Carlos Pacheco, Rafael Marin, and Jeff Loeb. How much of this arc can be attributed to each individual person? I have absolutely no idea, and I also don't know how much of this was Chris Claremont's original intent for the character. But regardless, they did kind of all collectively take the original very emotional miscarriage arc and sort of take a big dump on it. The pregnancy arc is not as drawn out this time, but it does arrive at a similar point. The baby begins emitting dangerous radiation bursts, and unfortunately, Reed is kidnapped by some villains at the time, so he is not around to fix it. This leads to Johnny being the one who has to seek out other scientists for help, and so he goes to the best scientist that he knows outside of Reed, Victor Von Doom. Doom agrees to help, which is maybe a little surprising if you're not familiar with him from the comics, but it is a very consistent part of his character that Dr. Doom does not hate children. In fact, quite the opposite. He is very protective of kids, like he is protective of his people in Latveria. He makes his stance incredibly clear when he arrives, saying, "The determination to protect your own is common to matriarch and monarch alike." With his signature combination of technology and sorcery, Doom is able to handle the radiation and deliver the child successfully, a favor which Invisible Woman returns by allowing him to name their daughter. Reed is not immediately happy about this, of course, but Sue only agreed to it in the first place because she knows Doom is a man of honor, especially when it comes to children. He's not going to name her something ridiculously spiteful, he's going to give her something respectable. However, it is Doom and the daughter of Reed Richards, so it's going to be a little spiteful. Doom decides to choose a name from his own past, subtly but undeniably tying the girl to him from that point forward. The name he chooses is one from his childhood, the name of his first love, Valeria. Thus, the circle is complete, and we have our new, or quote-unquote new, Valeria Richards. We don't have to worry about any of the stuff before this, thank God. Doom then leaves the scene with 2 consecutive panels that really summarize Doom's dichotomy as a character incredibly well. First off, he turns to the child and says, "I place you under my royal protection, little Valeria. If anyone is ever foolish enough to strike at you, they will deal with me." And then he turns to Reed and says, "Enjoy your family, Richards, and remember every time you look at your wife and daughter that Doom saved them both when once before you could not." As incredibly cold of an exit line as that is, this really was a win for everybody in the situation. The F4 have their kid happy and alive, that kid has the protection of Doom going forward, and Doom now has something that he can hold over his archenemy's head forever, which he will absolutely do many times in the future. But it's not going to be quite as simple as that, because Doom did leave a little surprise for later. See, when Doom was delivering the baby, he did cast just a tiny little spell on her. Nothing dangerous. He did give her royal protection, and the word of Doom is law. He will not do anything to harm Valeria. But he will use her as a spy camera. He talks to her directly, self-appointing as Valeria's godfather in the meantime, and then just uses her to keep an eye on the 4. And then later uses her as a conduit for his spell casting so that he can mess with stuff in the Baxter building directly. And as part of that, he sends Franklin Richards to hell. Yeah, that's a thing that happened once. I know Doom doesn't typically want to hurt kids, but I guess the god baby or god preteen at this point was a little too dangerous to just be left there. So he had to deal with that problem and did so in quite a way. Of course, the F4 manages to break Doom's connection to Valeria and get everything back to normal, though not before Doom takes another important milestone in the growing up of their child, Valeria's first word, which is and will forever be Doom. Now, there's something interesting that I have not mentioned up until this point, that being Valeria's powers. Well, I mentioned powers during the arc where she was from the future and called Marvel Girl, but like I said, no writer really acknowledges that anymore. In this version, she has different powers. Valeria's unique skills are less flashy than the other members of her family, but especially in the context of what the Fantastic Four does, no less practical. Valeria Richards is smart. Incredibly smart. One of, if not eventually, the smartest person on the planet. Now, real quick, because I know this is a whole debate, the title of smartest person in Marvel is thrown around a lot, but at the moment we do have a definitive answer. It is Moon Girl, Lunella Lafayette. Yes, she is objectively, canonically the smartest person. It's not Tony Stark or Reed Richards or any of them. It is Lunella. That is fact. The key with Valeria, and the reason that she's important in this equation, is that the comics do treat her powers relative to her age. She is extremely intelligent for a kid. She is still fairly young, even in current canon, and she will grow to be much smarter, as most people do as they get older. She's super smart now, so she's going to be incredibly super smart when she's an adult. Even at her young age, though, she does still stack up with other Marvel geniuses, including her father, and this is one half of the thing that makes her such a fun character. The other half is that Dr. Doom still views Valeria Richards as his daughter. Victor Von Doom keeps in regular contact with Valeria to such an extent that she often calls him Uncle Doom, and because she is super intelligent, this is not necessarily a normal parent and child dynamic. She can actually provide legitimate help in Doom's plans, leading to one of my favorite character dynamics in the entire Marvel Universe. Take this page, for example, in which Doom has rigged one of his time machines to keep up a special phase state that will contain Loki. In one panel, Valeria is giving him an up-to-date readout on the status of this extremely complex machine, and in the next panel, she asks if they can go get ice cream, which Doom says he will consider. The interactions between these two are consistently so much fun because the specific situation of Super Genius Baby allows Dr. Doom to both be a father figure, but also keep his characterization as Doom, which is something that would be very hard to do in any other situation, but with Valeria, it works. So now you might be wondering, how is all this happening? Why is the Fantastic Four allowing one of their kids to go and spend time with Dr. Doom of all people? And the real answer is that they kinda just couldn't stop her if they tried. Val is more than capable of contacting Doom entirely by herself. One, because she's just intelligent enough to make that happen on her own, and two, because Doom is invested in keeping her safe and willing to facilitate that connection from his side of the equation. Val won't help him with his more evil plans, of course, but if there is a world-threatening situation large enough that Doom has a stake, Val will approach him for help because he is fully capable of providing it. She's even stayed with him for a longer period of time before, when the Fantastic Four was going through some turmoil of their own. As if that was not enough, this practical respect goes both ways, and there have been cases in which Doom has asked Valeria for her assistance, most notably in the Axis event, which flipped the moralities of a bunch of characters, turning villains into heroes and heroes into villains. During this, Doom wanted to assemble a little strike force to deal with problems that the heroes weren't, and he asked for Valeria to assist him in building out that team. I also feel I need to point out that in this same arc, Valeria stood up to a full evil mode bloodlusted Scarlet Witch, was not scared of her at all, and then managed to outsmart Wanda and steal some of her magic, because Valeria is awesome. And this is nowhere near the only time that Val has helped save the world, because, you know, being an ally of both the Fantastic Four and Dr. Doom means that you can be on call for pretty much any crisis on the horizon. As such, she has a lot of comic appearances, over 300 of them and counting, but unfortunately she is pretty much supporting cast for the vast majority of them, usually just treated as one of the Fantastic Four's kids and not a main character, which is disappointing because I think she has a lot of potential. Val has gotten some fun stuff in recent years. She has aged a little bit. Her actual age is kind of up in the air because comic book characters very rarely have definitive ages, but she's like a teen or preteen, not a 5-year-old anymore. She has also taken on the codename of Brainstorm, which is a little cheesy, but she's a teenager, so whatever. I also have to point out here one of the funniest interactions she's ever had when the Fantastic Four were doing a whole multiversal space mission and going to a bunch of alien planets with a lot of their allies. She meets this red alien guy and they have a little flirting moment, like nothing too crazy. It's appropriate flirting for their age, but Reed is looking at them like, where have I seen this kid before? And Sue points out that he kind of looks like Namor, and then Reed's like, okay, we're leaving right now, say goodbye to everybody. Which also, since I'm bringing it up, I have to clarify, Namor and Invisible Woman have never been a thing, like not even briefly. That has always been a creepy one-sided thing on Namor's behalf, which just makes this even funnier. And even outside of the very good bit, this provides a great character moment between Val and her dad, because this alien prince is kinda dumb, and Val is also sort of acting dumb around him for attention, because, you know, she's a teenage girl and not necessarily the most confident or mature, and Reed encourages her and is like, hey, you don't need to play dumb, you're incredibly smart and you should show it. You don't have to change who you are just to get somebody else's attention. It's very sweet. See, Reed Richards can be a good dad. And this is another reason why I hope Marvel starts giving Val her due as a main character sometime soon, because the different aspects of her personality interact in very fun and interesting ways. Her status as a child of the Fantastic Four already sets her up for interesting storylines, especially with the way that her abilities contrast to those of her brother. Franklin can, in theory, do anything, but he is somewhat limited by the fact that he is not just a human, but specifically a teenage boy, a group famous for being logical and collected all the time. And then Val is the opposite of that. She is able to learn and understand and build anything that she needs to, but without any flashy or combat-capable superpowers to show for it. Val and Franklin make a fascinating pair, one being limitless power in a normal mind, and the other being a limitless mind with normal power. The narrative parallels are very clear, and I like them a lot. So that's already one cool thing that you can draw storylines out of, and then add the Doctor Doom thing on top of that, and I mean, I think the rest of this video made it pretty clear why that's interesting. Hell, there are alternate futures where Valeria becomes Doom's successor, and I don't mean the Marvel Girl stuff. We have seen main universe regular Valeria achieve that in different futures as well. And then, on top of all of that, she is still a regular teenage girl with regular teenage problems, in a Fantastic Four comic of all things, so you know that family-centric storylines are going to be a very core part of what the books will be about. Pile all of the already crazy stuff onto that setting, and it makes her so interesting to read. And now I get to do something that makes me very, very happy, which is instead of ending the video by saying, gee, I hope they do more stories with her, I get to point at an upcoming storyline that is going to feature Val. For anyone who does not know, Dr. Doom is Sorcerer Supreme right now. He became Sorcerer Supreme and then took over the world. The event is called One World Under Doom, and I'm not going to talk about it directly on YouTube yet because it is still ongoing. Like, the main series hasn't even finished yet, so I cannot talk about it all because I have not read it all. I definitely will in the future once it's released, though. But we also know that Dr. Doom is not going to stay Sorcerer Supreme forever. That should not surprise anybody. And Marvel has already begun to tease who the next Sorcerer Supreme might be. And it's not necessarily going to be Val, but there's going to be some kind of contest or challenge for the role. There's a bunch of characters in this teaser. You can look at all of them. I'm scrolling through right now, and oh, look, who's that up there? That's Val! Valeria is officially in the running to be the next Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, and my god, I really hope that happens. 1. Kid Sorcerer Supreme would be very interesting. 2. Val is a very science-minded person, and putting a scientist-type role in the Sorcerer Supreme position could also be very good. 3. Doom has it right now, and the narrative implications of it leaving Doom and going to Doom's goddaughter, I mean, people in the Marvel Universe wouldn't necessarily trust that, and that would make for a story that I definitely want to read. Now, I can't get everybody's hopes up yet. This comic is not releasing for months, and I don't know if Val's going to get it. Like I said, she is in the running, and that is all I can tell you right now. But fingers crossed, Gambit or Nico Minoru would also be good. Those are my third and second slots respectively, but Val's my number one pick. Whether she gets it or not, it makes me happy that she's here at all because it does show that Marvel is willing to put her in other storylines. Don't get me wrong, I love her in Fantastic Four books, but if you scroll through her 300 plus appearances, like 95% of them are Fantastic Four, and I would love to see her branch out into other things. Wherever she ends up though, I can guarantee you that it's going to be interesting because with a family like this, there is no other option. Thank you all for watching this video. As always, I hope you enjoyed. I got a laugh for a second about the timing of this one because it really worked out in my favor. I decided that I wanted to do a Valeria video because of Fantastic Four First Steps. This has been in my schedule for a while, and the whole thing where she might be the next Sorcerer Supreme, that came out after I had already decided to do the video, so that just worked out really well for me. Thanks, Marvel! To the few of you who are watching this video after the new Sorcerer Supreme is determined, because you read that comic and then went to YouTube looking for refreshers on all the characters who were in the running, I know there's going to be at least some of you. I also hope you enjoyed. And Were you expecting it to be this? I bet you weren't. I mean, it certainly got better at the end, but boy, that middle section was quite a ride, huh? Quick advertisements as usual. The main one is that I do have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, same username as here, link in bio, link in description, all the places. You can get early and ad-free access to all of my YouTube videos and an exclusive video every month. I think this is also the first video where I can officially say there are hours of exclusive content on there. I haven't been doing the Patreon for too long, and I believe last month was the one that ticked the total runtime of the exclusives over 2 hours. So yeah, hours, officially. Also, shout out to my artist, Ruben Perez, who drew the poses of the character you've been watching talk at you for the last half hour. I always love working with him, so go check out his stuff. And now, I want to come up with a nice ending line like I usually do, but my brain has just gotten stuck again on the fact that a team of multiple Marvel writers decided to repregnate Invisible Woman. Comics are weird, man. Comics are weird.